Section 8 of The Whys of Cooking by Janet McKenzie Hill. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Betty B. Breads. 4 of the simplest ingredients in the culinary laboratory, flour, salt, liquid, and yeast, enter into the composition of a loaf of bread. Yet the changes through which these materials pass before a finished loaf is evolved are the most complicated in all cookery. All the foodstuffs are found in bread, which if well made has high nutritive value. The liquid used in bread may be milk, or water, or a portion of each. Milk increases the nutritive value of the loaf. The protein in flour is in the form of gluten, and while elasticity is a property of all proteins, the gluten in wheat possesses this property in marked degree. This strong, elastic gluten makes a good framework to retain the air and carbon dioxide, and renders wheat the ideal grain for bread making. The protein in oats and corn are deficient in this property, and when used in bread making are combined with wheat. Wheat and flour vary greatly in the quantity of gluten present. Even the same variety of wheat will vary from season to season. Also, in connection with the kind of wheat, the time of planting affects the quantity and quality of the gluten. Spring wheat sown in the spring and harvested the same season contains more protein and consequently more gluten than winter wheat sown in the fall and harvested in the early part of the next summer. Flour from spring wheat, rich in gluten, is well adapted to bread making and is known as bread flour. It is creamy in color, granular to the touch, and passes through a sieve easily. A slight jar sends it through. Flour from winter wheat is whiter in color and soft to the touch. If a quantity be crushed in the hand, it will retain the impress of the lines in the hand. It tastes sweet, for what it lacks in gluten is made up in starch. It is adapted to the making of cake and pastry articles, foods in which delicacy rather than strength is sought. Such flour is known as pastry flour. Whys of bread making. 1. Why use bread flour in all yeast mixtures? Answer. It costs less to use bread flour for yeast mixtures than it does to use pastry flour. Less flour is required. In making bread, flour is added to liquid to make a dough stiff enough to knead. The liquid will take up a smaller measure of bread flour than of pastry flour. Bread flour contains a higher percentage of protein, gluten, than does pastry flour. It is an advantage to get considerable protein from bread. Gluten also has the property of elasticity, and by its stretching makes a tough framework to hold up the cellular structure of the loaf. 2. Why use milk in mixing bread? Answer. The bread is more nutritious when milk is used, milk being a protein or tissue builder. The spongy texture is preferred by some. 3. Why use water in mixing bread? Answer. Water is cheaper. The bread keeps moist longer than when milk is used. The texture of the bread is preferred by some. 4. Why not soften yeast in boiling hot water? Answer. Boiling water poured over a sprouting seed or young plant would destroy its life. The vitality of a yeast cake, which is a collection of plants massed together, would be destroyed just as certainly if it be mixed with boiling water. Yeast plants bear cold better than heat and may be kept alive some days in a refrigerator. 5. Why soften a yeast cake in a small measure of liquid? Answer. A yeast cake may be mixed thoroughly through a small measure of liquid. If added directly to the full measure of liquid to be used, it often fails of being distributed evenly through the dough. 6. Why add flour to liquid rather than liquid to flour? Answer. The measure of liquid decides the number and size of the loaves. The measure of flour largely decides the texture of the loaf. 1 cupful of liquid makes a loaf of bread for a brick loaf pan of ordinary size. 7. Why mix bread dough in an earthen bowl? Answer. An earthen bowl holds warmth longer than a metal receptacle. Also, from metal receptacles the knife used in mixing would be liable to scrape metal into the dough. 8. Why mix bread dough with a knife? Answer. A dough is too heavy for beating. It is mixed by being turned over and over and by cutting down through it. For such motions a knife, not too flexible, is the implement most easily used. 9. Is it better to mix bread at night? Answer. Bread mixed at night is ready to shape into loaves the first thing in the morning, and may be baked immediately after breakfast. Byproducts of fermentation, which give a characteristic sweetness to bread, are generated during the long process. The cost of yeast is less, because one yeast cake will make 6 loaves of bread, or its equivalent in bread and biscuit. 10. Why mix in the morning? Answer. The dough may be watched and kept in good condition. 11. Why knead bread dough? Answer. Bread dough is kneaded the first time to distribute the ingredients evenly through the mass, to give body to the dough, to bring out the elasticity of the gluten in the flour, and to make the mixture smooth. The second kneading is to break up the large cavities caused by gas bubbles and to make the texture uniform and fine. 12. Why use shortening, Crisco, in bread? Answer. Shortening makes tender bread. 13. Why shape the dough for brick loaf pan in 2 rounds? Answer. A loaf of bread baked in 2 rounds gives slices of a nearly uniform size. If doubt is felt as to the degree of baking, the loaf may be split apart at the center and the condition noted. If properly baked, the crumb will rebound under pressure. 14. Why bake bread in small loaves? Answer. Bread is baked in small loaves that it may be baked through to the very center of the loaf. In a small loaf the proportion of crust to crumb is greater than in a large loaf. 15. Why is a large proportion of crust desirable? Answer. On account of the higher degree, dry heat to which the crust is subjected, the starch in composition is changed to dextrin, which is more easily digested than starch. Some, probably most of the starch in the crust has been changed by the dry heat. Moisture keeps the heat down at the center of the loaf. To dextrin. Dextrin is soluble in water, starch is not, and is thus partially digested. Many people do not digest starch readily. The crust would correspond to toast. In toast the moisture is first dried out slowly, then the bread is put over strong heat, which changes the starch on the surface to dextrin, that is more easily digested. 16. Why bake bread thoroughly? Answer. Bread is baked to kill the yeast plants which have served their purpose, to drive off the alcohol and carbon dioxide gas, and to harden the cell walls. It should also be well baked to ensure its keeping in good condition. 17. Why is yeast used in bread making? Answer. Yeast is used in bread making to make the bread light and porous and thus easily masticated, and to allow the digestive fluids to penetrate it readily. 18. Why does yeast make bread light? Answer. Commercial yeast is a collection of yeast plants in a state of rest. Provide them with moisture, warmth, and the food they like, present in flour. The plant will grow and multiply. As the plant feed, they cause the sugar in composition to be broken up, and bubbles of gas and alcohol are formed. The sticky gluten of the flour holds the bubbles and causes the mass to swell or rise. 19. What is the difference between a quick, medium, or slow oven, and the effects of same? Answer. Heat indicators set into oven doors of some cooking ranges are a guide to the heat of the oven and of great help in baking. They do not register heat in degrees. With the hand on the dial at 12 o'clock, the heat is right for cake in small tins, layers or thin loaves, pies, bread, etc. With the hand at any point before 12 o'clock, the heat is moderate to slow, according to the distance from 12 o'clock. With the hand at a point beyond 12 o'clock, the oven is hot or very hot, according to the distance beyond that point. With the thermometer, bread, pies, and plain cake should be set to bake at 380 degrees Fahrenheit, or when a bit of white paper dropped into the oven will become a delicate brown in 5 minutes. For biscuits, muffins, or small cakes, the paper should become a deep golden brown in 5 minutes. With the oven in this latter condition, the thermometer would register 440 degrees Fahrenheit. 20. Why not hurry bread and rolls in the second rising? Answer. The shapes given to bread and rolls are retained more perfectly if the rising be natural and uniform. 21. Why wash and Crisco the bowl in which dough for rolls, as Parker House, is set to rise? Answer. If the bowl be thus treated, and the dough when well risen is not kept down or disturbed in any way, it may be turned upside down on a lightly floured board and rolled into a thin sheet with very few movements of the rolling pin. Also, when cut into rounds and folded, the rolls will hold their shape without flying back. 22. Why are Southern beaten biscuit considered a wholesome article of food? Answer. Beaten biscuit are mixed very stiff, but very little shortening or liquid being used. They are lightened by air that is beaten into them, and when baked are dry. To be swallowed readily, they must be masticated for some time, and this ensures digestion. 23. Why are cornmeal, rye meal, or graham muffins baked in a hot iron muffin pan considered more wholesome than the same mixture baked in a sheet and cut into squares? Answer. The whole surface of each muffin is crusty, and much of it has been changed by heat to dextrin, and this is the first step in digestion. Also, being crusty, the muffin is liable to be more thoroughly masticated than the softer product baked in a sheet. This is further gain. 24. Why do we use baking powder in muffins, biscuits, griddle cakes, waffles, cake, etc.? Answer. Baking powder is used in flour mixtures to make them light. Digestion is the first step in the change of food to produce body substance or energy, and food that is light is easily penetrated by the digestive fluids. 25. Why does baking powder make certain foods light? Answer. Baking powder is a mixture of an acid and an alkaline carbonate mixed with a starch to separate the two ingredients. Where these two are dissolved together, a chemical action takes place and a gas is given off. If this action takes place in a moist flour mixture, the mass is lightened thereby. 26. Why are sour milk and carbonate of soda and acid molasses and soda not as satisfactory means of generating gas for lightening dough as baking powder? Answer. Both sour milk and molasses vary so much in acidity from time to time that it is not easy to determine the quantity of soda to use. If too little is taken, gas enough to make the mixture light will not be evolved, and if too much is taken, there will not be enough acid to neutralize it, and the food will be yellow and unwholesome. Recipes. 2 loaves white bread. 1/3 cake compressed yeast, at night. 1/2 cupful water, 2 cupfuls scalded milk or half milk and half water, 2 tablespoonfuls Crisco, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1 teaspoonful salt, about 7 cupfuls flour. To the milk, or milk and water, add the Crisco, sugar, and salt. When lukewarm, add the yeast mixed with the half cupful of liquid and the flour. Use an earthen bowl and mix with a knife to a dough. Knead until elastic. Let rise in a temperature of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. The shelf over the stove is not a suitable place. When doubled in bulk, shape into 2 loaves. When again light, bake about 1 hour. To mix in the morning, use 1 whole yeast cake. Noisette bread. 1 cake compressed yeast, 1/4 cupful lukewarm water, 1 cupful scalded milk, 1 tablespoonful Crisco, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 2 tablespoonfuls molasses, 1 cupful or less noisette or filbert meats, left whole, 1/2 cupful white flour, 3 cupfuls or more whole wheat flour. Mix the yeast with the water. To the milk add the Crisco, molasses, salt, and nut meats, and when lukewarm add the yeast and flour and mix to a dough. Knead until smooth and elastic. Let rise until doubled in bulk. Shape into a loaf. When again light, bake 1 hour. Without the nuts, this is good plain whole wheat bread. To mix at night, use 1/3 cake compressed yeast. Quick yeast rolls. 1 cupful scalded milk, 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1 level tablespoonful sugar, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1 cake compressed yeast, 1/4 cupful lukewarm water, bread flour for soft dough, about 4 cupfuls. Add the Crisco, sugar, and salt to the scalded milk. When lukewarm, add the yeast mixed with the water and stir in the flour. Do not mix the dough stiff enough to knead. Mix, cut, and turn over and over with a knife, cover and set aside to become light. With Criscoed fingers pull off bits of the dough of the same size and work it into smooth balls. Set these some distance apart in Criscoed pans, that they may be crusty, and when again light, bake about half an hour. Rye meal bread. 1 cake compressed yeast, 1/2 cupful lukewarm water, 1 1/4 cupful scalded milk, 1/3 cupful molasses, 2 tablespoonfuls Crisco, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1 1/2 cupfuls bread flour, 1 1/2 cupfuls graham flour, 1 cupful rye meal. Soften yeast in water. To milk add molasses, Crisco, and salt. When lukewarm, add yeast mixed through water. Stir in the flour and meal. Sift flour and meal first. Have dough quite stiff, but not enough to knead. Cover and let stand until double in bulk. Cut down and turn into bread pan size of brick loaf. When again light, bake 1 hour. Quick Sally Lunn. 1 cake compressed yeast, 1/4 cupful scalded and cooled milk, 1 cupful scalded milk, 2 tablespoonfuls Crisco, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1 egg beaten light, 2 1/4 cupfuls bread flour. Mix the yeast with the 1/4 cupful of milk. Add the Crisco, salt, and sugar to the hot milk, and when cool to lukewarm add the milk and yeast, the egg, and the flour. Beat until smooth and turn into a Criscoed pan about 10 by 5½ inches. Let stand covered and out of draughts until nearly doubled in bulk. Brush over the top with melted Crisco, dredge with granulated sugar, and bake about 25 minutes. Serve hot, or when cold cut in slices and toast. Squash buns. 1/3 cake compressed yeast, 1/2 cupful lukewarm water, 1/2 cupful scalded milk, 1/2 cupful cooked squash, 1/4 cupful brown sugar, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 cupful melted Crisco, about 3 cupfuls bread flour, 1 tablespoonful cornstarch, 3 tablespoonfuls cold water, 1/2 cupful or more boiling water, granulated sugar. Soften yeast in water, add milk, squash, sugar, salt, Crisco, and flour. Mix to a soft dough. Knead nearly 10 minutes, using no more flour than necessary. Set in a clean Criscoed bowl. Cover and let stand overnight, when the mixture should have doubled in bulk. Turn upside down on a floured board. Roll into a sheet nearly an inch thick. Dip a cutter in flour and cut into rounds. Set close together in a baking pan, brushing the surfaces that come in contact with melted Crisco. When very light, doubled in bulk, bake about half an hour. Mix the cornstarch with cold water, add the boiling water, stir until boiling, let simmer until the buns are baked. Brush with the starch, dredge with sugar, set into the oven until the sugar melts and glazes the buns. Individual chicken pies. 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1/4 cupful flour, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 teaspoonful paprika, 1 cupful thin cream, 1 cupful chicken broth, 2 1/2 cupfuls cooked chicken in cubes. Melt the Crisco. In it cook the flour and seasonings. Add the cream and broth and stir until bubbly. Add the chicken and let become very hot. Turn into individual dishes, glass or crockery. Set above the chicken in each dish 3 or 4 hot baking powder biscuit, about 1 1/4 inch in diameter. Serve at once. Cooked celery, in 1/4 inch slices, may replace part of the chicken. Baking powder biscuit. 2 cupfuls pastry flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 teaspoonful salt, 3 tablespoonfuls Crisco, about 3/4 cupful milk or water. Sift the dry ingredients together twice and cut in the Crisco with 2 knives. Add the milk gradually and mix to a dough that cleans the bowl. Turn the dough on a floured board, roll with a knife to coat with flour, knead slightly, then pat and roll into a sheet 1/2 inch thick. Cut in rounds, set in Criscoed tin, and brush over the biscuits with melted Crisco. Bake about 15 minutes. Potato biscuit. 1 1/2 cupfuls pastry flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1 cupful mashed potato, 1/4 cupful Crisco, milk as needed. Sift together the flour, baking powder, and salt. Add the potato pressed through a ricer, cut in the Crisco, then use milk as needed to mix a dough that cleans the bowl. Turn on a floured board with the knife to coat with flour. Knead slightly, then pat and roll into a sheet. Cut in rounds and bake about 15 minutes in a quick oven. Nut and fruit rolls. 3 cupfuls pastry flour, 5 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3/4 teaspoonful salt, 1/3 cupful Crisco, 1 egg beaten light, 3/4 cupful milk, nearly, 1 tablespoonful softened Crisco, 1/3 cupful dried currants, 1/3 cupful nut meats broken in pieces, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1 teaspoonful cinnamon if desired. Sift together the dry ingredients twice, and with 2 knives cut in the Crisco. Add part of the milk to the egg and use in mixing the dry ingredients to a dough that cleans the bowl. Use more of the milk as is required. Turn the dough on a floured board, roll to coat lightly with flour, knead and roll into a rectangular sheet 1/3 an inch thick. Spread with the softened Crisco, sprinkle over the other ingredients and roll compactly as a jelly roll. Cut in pieces an inch and a half long. Set on end close together in a Criscoed pan. Bake about 25 minutes. Chicken roly-poly. 2 cupfuls pastry flour, 3 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1 egg beaten light, 2/3 cupful milk about, 1 1/2 cupfuls chopped chicken, 1/2 cupful chicken gravy or cream sauce, 1/4 cupful Crisco, 1/4 cupful flour, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 teaspoonful black pepper, 2 cupfuls chicken broth. Make a biscuit dough of the ingredients in the first column and roll into a rectangular sheet 1/4 an inch thick. Mix the chicken with the 1/2 cupful of sauce and spread over the dough. Roll compactly like a jelly roll and set into a baking pan. Brush over with a little of the egg reserved for the purpose. Bake about 20 minutes. Serve, cut in pieces, with a sauce made of the Crisco, flour, seasonings, and broth. Ham, lamb, or veal may be used in the same way. Philadelphia butter buns. 1 cake compressed yeast, 1/4 cupful water, 1 cupful scalded milk, 1 1/2 cupfuls bread flour, 1/4 cupful granulated sugar, 1/4 cupful Crisco melted, 2 egg yolks, 1 teaspoonful salt, grated rind 1 lemon, flour for dough, 3 to 4 tablespoonfuls softened Crisco, 3/4 cupful brown sugar, 1 tablespoonful cinnamon, 1/2 cupful currants or raisins. Make a sponge of the first 4 ingredients. When light, add the sugar, Crisco, egg yolks, salt, rind, and flour. About 3 cupfuls of flour will be required. Knead until smooth and elastic. Cover close and set aside to become doubled in bulk. Turn upside down on a board, roll into a rectangular sheet, spread with softened Crisco, dredge with 1 or 2 tablespoonfuls of the sugar and the cinnamon, then sprinkle with the fruit and roll as a jelly roll. Cut into pieces about 1 1/4 inches long. The dough will make 16 buns. Put 3 tablespoonfuls of Crisco into a pan 7 by 10 inches. Sprinkle in the rest of the brown sugar. Set the buns on the sugar and let become light. Bake in a moderate oven. Turn upside down. The sugar and Crisco should glaze the bottom of the buns. Serve with coffee or cocoa. These are good reheated. Quick nut bread. 2 cupfuls pastry flour, 1 cupful graham flour, 1 teaspoonful salt, 1 cupful sugar, 5 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 cupful chopped nut meats, 2 tablespoonfuls melted Crisco, 1 egg beaten light, 1 cupful water. Sift together the first 5 ingredients. Add the nuts, the Crisco, and the egg mixed with the water, and stir all together. Turn into a Criscoed bread pan and let stand 15 minutes. Bake 3/4 of an hour. Apple dumpling. Fill a pudding dish with pared, quartered, and cored apples cut in slices. Prepare the dough as given on page 62 For strawberry shortcake, sprinkle half a teaspoonful of salt and 1/4 a cupful of hot water over the apples, then over them spread the dough. Let bake in a moderate oven about half an hour. Turn upside down on a serving dish and serve at once with butter and sugar or maple syrup. Sliced peaches make a good dumpling. Cornmeal griddle cakes. 1 cupful sweet milk, 1/2 cupful cornmeal, 2/3 cupful white flour, 2 1/2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/4 teaspoonful salt, 1 tablespoonful sugar, 1 egg beaten light, 2 tablespoonfuls melted Crisco. At night scald the milk and pour over the cornmeal. Mix, cover, and let stand overnight. Sift together the rest of the dry ingredients and add to the meal with the egg and Crisco. Mix and bake on a hot Criscoed griddle. When the cakes are full of bubbles, turn to brown the other side. More milk may be needed in the morning. Rich graham muffins. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 3/4 cupful sugar, 2 eggs beaten light, 1/4 teaspoonful soda, 1/2 cupful thick sour milk, 1 cupful white flour, 1 cupful graham flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt. Cream the Crisco, beat in the sugar and the eggs. Sift the soda into the sour milk, mix thoroughly and add to the first mixture. Sift together the white flour, the graham flour, baking powder, and salt, and stir into the liquid. Bake in a hot, well Criscoed muffin pan about 25 minutes. White muffins. 2 cupfuls sifted pastry flour, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3/4 teaspoonful salt, 1/4 cupful sugar if desired, 1 egg beaten light, 1 cupful milk, about 4 tablespoonfuls Crisco melted. Sift together the first 4 ingredients twice. Add the milk to the beaten egg and stir into the dry ingredients. Beat in the Crisco. Bake in a hot, well Criscoed cast iron pan about 25 minutes. For a change, figs or dates cut in small pieces may be mixed through the dry ingredients before the liquid is added. Meat pie biscuit crust. Use remnants of roast beef, lamb or veal, or broiled steak. Remove all unedible portions from the meat, cover with a broth made from the bones and trimmings, covered with cold water, and a few slices of onion, carrot, celery, and parsley leaves, and let simmer until tender. Skim the meat, about a quart, into a baking dish. Stir 1/3 a cupful of flour, 3/4 a teaspoonful of salt, half a teaspoonful of pepper, and half a cupful of cold water to a smooth paste. Then add to the hot broth 3 cupfuls and stir until boiling. Pour part of this sauce over the meat. Reserve the rest to serve in a bowl. For the crust, sift together 3 cupfuls of flour, 5 teaspoonfuls of baking powder, and 3/4 a teaspoonful of salt. Cut in 1/3 a cupful of Crisco and mix to a dough with milk. Knead slightly. Roll into a sheet to fit the baking dish, which should be broad and shallow rather than deep. Cut several slits in the top and set it above the meat, resting on the edge of the dish, rubbed over with Crisco. Brush over the top of the crust with melted Crisco or beaten egg that it may bake to a rich brown. Bake about half an hour. For a higher flavored dish, add to the sauce 2 tablespoonfuls of Worcestershire sauce, tomato or mushroom ketchup, or chili sauce. 1/4 a cupful of dried mushrooms soaked in cold water may also be added to the meat. Soft cornbread. 1 quart milk, 1 cupful white cornmeal, 1 teaspoonful salt, 2 teaspoonfuls Crisco, 1 egg beaten light, 2 tablespoonfuls baking powder. Scald the milk in a double boiler. When the milk is scalded and the water in the lower dish is boiling, gradually stir the cornmeal into the milk. Continue to stir until the mixture thickens slightly, then cover and let cook, stirring occasionally for 2 hours. Beat in the salt, Crisco, egg, and baking powder, and turn into a well Criscoed baking dish suitable for the table. Bake about 1 hour. Serve hot from the dish. This is often called spoon cornbread, as it is soft and served with a spoon. Good for either luncheon or dinner. Honey cookies. 1/2 cupful Crisco, 3/4 cupful granulated sugar, 1/2 cupful honey, grated rind, 1 lemon, 1 egg and 1 yolk, 3 cupfuls or more of flour, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 teaspoonful salt, chopped almonds, about 12, 1 egg white and granulated sugar for glazing. Beat the Crisco to a cream and gradually beat in the sugar and the honey. Add the lemon rind, the egg and yolk beaten together, and the flour sifted with the baking powder and salt, and mix to a dough that may be kneaded. More flour may be required. Knead a portion of the dough on a floured board, roll into a thin sheet, and cut into rounds. Rub over the baking pan with Crisco, set the cookies in place, brush them with the egg white reserved for the purpose and slightly beaten, then sprinkle with the chopped nuts, dredge with sugar, and bake to an amber color. Tea scones. 2 cupfuls pastry flour, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1 teaspoonful salt, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 3 tablespoonfuls Crisco, 1 egg beaten light, 1/2 to 2/3 cupful milk, sugar for dredging. Sift together the dry ingredients twice, and work in the Crisco with 2 knives. Add the 1/2 cupful of milk to the egg, and gradually use in mixing a dough. Use more milk if needed. Turn on a floured board, knead slightly, pat and roll into a sheet, cut into rounds, set in Criscoed tin. Brush over with melted Crisco and dredge with sugar. Bake about 15 minutes. Serve with tea or cocoa. Whole wheat muffins. 1 cupful white flour, 1 cupful entire wheat flour, 2 tablespoonfuls sugar, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 4 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1 egg, 1 1/4 cupfuls milk, 3 tablespoonfuls melted Crisco. Sift together all the dry ingredients, add the well-beaten egg, milk, and melted Crisco. Beat thoroughly and bake about 25 minutes in a hot Criscoed iron muffin pan. Rice griddle cakes. 1/2 cupful rice, washed, 1 teaspoonful salt, 3 cupfuls boiling water, 1 1/2 cupfuls cooked rice, 2 egg yolks beaten light, 1 cupful flour, 2 teaspoonfuls baking powder, 1/2 teaspoonful salt, 2 tablespoonfuls melted Crisco, 2 egg whites beaten light. Add the salt to the boiling water, and in it cook the rice till tender. Then press through a potato ricer or sieve. To 1 cupful and a half of rice pulp, add the yolks and the dry ingredients and mix thoroughly. Add the Crisco and whites, beat together and bake at once on a hot, well Criscoed griddle. End of section 8.